I wasn't even supposed to be in DC that week. I'd booked a last-minute ticket from O'Hare because my sister had started panicking over something with Mom's estate. Lawyers stalling, the condo management being difficult. And I told myself it'd be simpler to just swing down for a few days to help sort the paperwork. I'd booked a room at the Hilton Garden Inn on 14th Street instead of crashing at her place in Arlington. I told her it was for space, which was partly true, but mostly I just needed to not be inside that old townhouse again, the one we grew up in. I hadn't been back to the city since the funeral, and DC hadn't changed. Still the same low skies, the matte gray heaviness pressing down over everything, like the clouds never quite lifted. On that first morning, I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, rolling my neck, trying to work out this deep ache beneath my skull. I'd barely slept. I kept checking the time on the microwave in the room's small kitchenette, and then glancing at my Apple Watch, noticing a few seconds of mismatch that I chalked up to sinking lag. But then I'd check again, and it was more than a few seconds, sometimes close to a minute off, and they seemed to be converging and diverging without pattern. I told myself it was wireless signal interference. Too many devices in too small a space. That afternoon, I walked down toward the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, more out of muscle memory than any real desire. I hadn't been inside since elementary school field trips. The mall was half empty, the white gravel paths looking washed out under weak November light. There was a film of gray dust on the upper facade of the museum, visible only if you stared up into the columns along Constitution Avenue. And somehow the air there always felt colder than anywhere else in the city, even on temperate days. I entered just after 2 p.m. The atrium was, as always, dominated by the bull elephant in the rotunda, eternal in its mid-charge, wooden pose. The audio environment buzzed someone else's conversations, the clack of school tours, stroller wheels, camera shutters. I didn't feel watched. Not exactly, but there was a sensation I hadn't expected. Walking into that building again after decades, that stillness had gotten deeper than it should have been. The elephant's eyes, glossed under artificial lights, didn't track you. But there was something wrong between the silences. Heat dampers sighed overhead at strange intervals, and in the corner by the elevators, I could swear I heard the audio tour reset itself, mid-sentence, 3 times in under a minute. I kept walking past the Hall of Mammals, past the Evolution Wing, then turned into the Ocean Hall with its layered projections of wave patterns curling across the ceiling, the long expanse of blue overhead. I stopped near the coelacanth display, the ancient living fossil, and just stood there, looking at the cross-sections in resin and the tubular eyes, when I realized something was off with the reflection. The glass was behaving wrong. My head drifted slightly left, following the movement of a tour group, but my reflection stayed centered, not exactly frozen. It shifted, but not in sync. It lagged by a fraction of a second like a buffering video feed. I took a deliberate step left. A half moment later, my mirrored body followed, no longer a reflection but a cousin, delayed and vaguely hollow. I reached for my phone to check the front camera, wanted to see if it would show the same, but the screen refused to illuminate even after repeated taps. I held the button. Dead. Yet I knew I'd charged it that morning in the hotel. I left quickly after that, told myself it was exhaustion. The museum lighting's always strange. Too cold in the central parts, too warm in the corners, like the Kelvin values get cross-wired between exhibits. Back at the hotel, I let the TV run, just for sound. But by nightfall, I noticed the shadows in the kitchenette tilting in the wrong direction. There was only one bedside lamp on, and yet the shadows of the chairs stretched toward it instead of away. Still, that could be a trick of reflections. The mirror behind the desk framed the room in a way that could cause odd bounce light distortions. I tried to sleep again and again failed. Sometime near 4, I got out of bed and walked down 14th Street, heading nowhere, just wanting to loosen the tightness in my chest. The city was ghosted at that hour. Smears of amber light across blank sidewalks, the hush of traffic many blocks away. When I passed under some scaffolding near Thomas Circle, I saw something strange in the dusty Plex panels pinned to the sides. Not movement exactly, but a continuity gap. You stepped into the corridor and everything ahead of you, the street, the chapel across the park, looked subtly repainted like a lower resolution version of reality. Smaller things stood out first. The flag outside the Archdiocese office not stirring, though I could feel wind on my skin. The traffic light pulsing red, but without casting that color anywhere. It wasn't just dim. It was absent, like the signifiers of consequence had been peeled off. It happened again, 2 days later. Same museum. I hadn't even meant to go back, but something kept drawing me there. I wandered into the Deep Time fossil exhibit again, and walked past the Tyrannosaur skeleton that always seemed too clean to be ancient. This time I stood facing one of the interactive screens, motion sensors, looping animations, and watched the Cenozoic timeline auto-scroll and then reverse, all on its own. The digits didn't flip mechanically. They softened, like numbers melting into themselves. I turned. No docents nearby, no other guests in that section. And I remember how the distant echo of school groups had ceased entirely. I looked down. My own shadow was absent on the floor. The T-Rex cast one. The hanging plants overhead cast elongated ones. I, surrounded by light from above, cast nothing. You start questioning how much of your cognitive framework operates by default, a hidden scaffolding of what feels right. When those ambient cues shift, even minutely, your brain rebels. The third time, it wasn't the museum. I'd tried to break the cycle, visited the National Portrait Gallery instead, took the Red Line to Judiciary Square, just to vary the routine. As I passed through the courtyard of the old patent office building, I paused by a glass sculpture installation, mirrored on the shallow water feature. My face appeared intact in the reflection, but my eyes were dark, borderline featureless, like someone had erased the irises. I reached up to touch my own eyelid, felt it, blinking normally. But in the water, the reflected self didn't blink at all, just stared. My phone wouldn't capture it. Photos came out blurry, always shifting 1 degree off center, or showed the image as completely empty glass. Back in the hotel room that night, I stood at the window watching the light fade off Thomas Circle and realized I could no longer remember which day it was. Not out of sleep deprivation, out of sequence collapse. Clocks diverged by tens of minutes, depending on which one I checked. My phone would say 6:15. The cable menu claimed 6:04. The desk clock, which I'd never adjusted, consistently lagged 1 hour behind and 25 minutes ahead depending on how long you stared at it. I opened settings to force a network resync, but an alert popped up briefly in a format I didn't recognize. Flat gray box, raw system text, before disappearing. The next morning, the minibar fridge was humming a low, harmonic tone. Same note, held without waver, barely audible but deep enough that it felt like it lived under the skin. When I opened the fridge, nothing was inside but condensation and a single item I hadn't put there. A small square photo, glossy, showing nothing recognizable. A curvature of floor in some public structure. Indeterminate lighting. No timestamp, no label. I went to throw it away but stopped. Carried it with me in my wallet. And when I passed through security back at the Natural History Museum later that day, the metal detector beeped for the first time. No metal on me, no belt, no phone this time. Yet the guard pulled me aside and waved the wand, which gave off 2 soft pulses near my left pocket. The photo. He held it briefly, unbothered. Let me through with a vague nod, no explanation. On the final night I sat in the museum from open to close. Something had shifted. Not just perception now, structure. The layout between floors didn't match anymore. I took the stairs from the mammal wing to the minerals exhibit and found myself instead in a mezzanine I could not map, lined with outdated panels describing farming equipment in countries that no longer used those words. The cursor on some of the touchscreen displays moved before I touched them. Looping videos started midway through sentences I didn't recognize, and one bench near the insect zoo had no bolts, securing it to the floor, and cast no shadow despite overhead fluorescence illuminating everything else. I ran my hand under it, not even a dim edge. At one point, I stood inside the Hall of Human Origins and felt an overpowering need to check my pulse. Not for health, for continuity. I couldn't feel it at first. Then I did. But the rhythm was asynchronous with the blink of my vision. I held my breath and timed my heartbeat against the distant ticking of a mechanical wall clock. Neither matched. I sat down against a wall and recorded a voice memo on my phone, just repeating my name and the date and the time over and over, like carving a marker. When I played it back, the memo was 27 seconds longer than what I'd said aloud, with long, staticky voids between my words. At the end was a single phrase I hadn't spoken. Museum closes at 5:51. That Friday, when I finally packed, I discovered all the mirrors in the room had fogged slightly but irregularly. Ovals of clarity hung outside standard line of sight. When I leaned in to wipe them, they didn't fog from my breath. They were fogging from the inside. The elevator down to the lobby stalled briefly between floors 3 and 2, light shifting subtly toward green. When the doors opened, the lobby was empty. The same chairs, same magazines on the table, coffee machine humming. But the silence had taken on a muscular tone, like some presence was holding its breath and stilling all air around it. A man passed behind the check-in desk, face down, writing something, but when I looked again, he was gone. I turned to the door. The street outside was moving, barely, but just too slow. The cars passed like syrup, not properly animated. I remember pushing the door and feeling no immediate resistance, like there was an interval, frame lag, before the weight caught up. I made it to National Airport and printed my boarding pass. Gate 23A. I sat by the window. Then the announcement tone rang. Not from overhead, but from my phone speaker, even though airplane mode was on. The tone duplicated twice, not mirrored, just overlaid. A man 2 rows ahead turned to look at me, then turned away before our eyes met. I watched the tarmac. The baggage cart passed from one direction, then again. Same cart, same driver. 3 times. I didn't board. I walked to the long-term garage and unlocked a rental car with my name already on the reservation. I hadn't made one. Still drove. Left the city by 395 south. The signs dimmed one by one. GPS lost signal near Fredericksburg. Dust coated the windshield when I pulled into a late-night rest stop and sat still, motor off, under halogen buzzing that never fully steadied. I found the photo again in my wallet. Looked close. The curvature of floor? I recognized it now. It was the rotunda at the Natural History Museum. But there was no elephant, no displays, only a wall of mirrors, and no reflection at all.